Thanks. I just need that kind.
Tiger Woods final round. I don't care which one I use.
My days, it's more like Star Trek red shirt guy. So if I'm not getting shot at, I don't know what I'm doing. So here we are again, back again to talk about some of the headlines. I'm only going to bring up a couple because hopefully you've got some things you can throw out here as well. So let's talk about a couple of the lovely ones that have popped up recently that have just really annoyed me. How many people have a mortgage or a title with First American Financial? Guess what? Everyone knows about it now. 885 million million documents leaked. Yeah. I don't remember how many years it goes back, but it goes back a good chunk of change. So yeah, now we've got that out there floating around that I'm sure we'll be able to find.
Lawsuits?
Well, we'll talk about lawsuits. I'm sure lawsuits will be coming out of this. This one I just had to laugh at. Matter of fact, I'm going to have a problem probably trying to read this. The U.S. Air Force is investigating. You know who they're investigating? The U.S. Navy for planting email tracking malware. I don't even know where to begin on this one. Again, I'm just going to leave that one right there. I think that just
lawyers got involved. That's what it was.
there was a lot of lawyers, I'm sure, involved on that one.
One
So,
lawyer was trying to find out where the leak was.
well,
So he started sending the stuff out.
good. You think he'd pick up a phone?
It's hilarious.
I do too. I think there's a lot more of that going on out there than we'd ever want to know about. We did talk about lawsuits. We've mentioned the word briefly. Well, Moody's just downgraded Equifax rating outlook. And this is due to their breach. So this will cause even more pain, as if they're not in enough pain already. Which breach? The one that, let me find the little email article here, because I want to make sure I get the number right. Well, everyone says, yeah, they got a great profit margin, except for, does anybody know what that breach at Equifax has cost them? The recovery costs are yet. Past $1 billion. $1 billion. It's now past the $1 billion mark for that Equifax breach. Now, it would be really interesting to know, because security is a risk trade-off. Let's be very honest. And from the security side, I deal with this every day. I want to build walls taller, fatter, more alarms, armed guards, the whole 9 yards. Business has still got to work. And at the end of the day, it's a business decision to accept the risk. So what you try to do is you try to drive that down to a good cost point. I'd like to see what's happening in the back rooms right now with this, since it's $1 billion. How much money would they have had to spend up front to not spend $1 billion and all the damage of reputation that's going on now? That would be a really interesting thing to see. Incident response is always kind of fun, because half the time when you're actually doing an incident response, you know, hey, somebody's alerted, there's something bad going on in the server. Great, somebody alerted me, we're on it, we start looking, and as you start looking at logs, two things happen. Management tells you, when are you going to be done looking at the logs? And you quickly try to explain to them, looking at a terabyte worth of logs takes more than a couple of seconds, which they don't understand. The second thing that happens as you're looking through those terabytes of log and their eyes are starting to bleed is you discover what? What do you discover as you're looking through those logs?
It's the worst thing they thought.
You discover not that it's worse than it's thought, it's actually probably not the first breach. I've been involved in multiple issues where you go looking for one thing and you find that one thing and then you say, what's that over there? And you start poking, and guess what you do is you uncover another earlier breach that no one ever reported. And when you start poking on that, what can happen? You find something even earlier. So anytime somebody says, well, how long is this going to take? I say, here's my wild number. Now multiply that by 3 at least, because we all know what's going to happen. Another Google one. Everyone saw the Google outage? Everyone saw the great Google outage? It'll be interesting hearing what the root cause of that was. At this point, they said something networking based, which will be quite entertaining to hear the resolution of that. But Google G Suite had a password problem. It left some passwords stored in plain text for 14 years. Oops. MongoDB databases. Hacking groups wipes out the content of 12,000 open Mongo databases. No longer are some of these groups interested in just quietly taking your data. Once they've gotten your data, they're going to wipe out your data. One of the most common ways that I've seen lately is not just deleting the database, which you can usually recover from, assuming you have backups. Again, we won't go down that avenue because that goes down an icky avenue. But one of the other things they'll do is sometimes they'll actually inject to where they start encrypting the database for you. They put in a password, they make sure it's in the stored procedure so that you can continue to access it perfectly normal. You don't even notice. And then after 30, 90 days, when they know that that database has been backed up to your offsite and you purged your offsite and things like that, what do? Then they just simply delete the password. Now your database is still technically there, but without a password for the encryption, what can you get to? Nothing. So, let's see. Cat flaw on millions of Cisco devices could enable secure boot bypass. The reason I bring this one up is because while in general we're getting better and better at protecting our operating systems and patching them, one of our areas, and I see somebody nodding his head over here, that we really still have a problem with is updating the firmware on network devices. You want to watch a battle ensue in a company, go tell your networking guys that they have to update their iOS. And just wait for the fight, because it's going to be a fight. Interesting problem, you know, one of those things that they always want to be on the, if they don't need the features in it, they don't want to move to it, because there's all kinds of potential problems. So they don't want to move at all. So sometimes when you encounter network devices, the iOS isn't a couple of years old, it's really old. Good article on 7 critical security steps to protect your Office 365. One of the biggest ones in here that I see people not doing is multi-factor authentication. It's easy, it's cheap. Yes, some multi-factor authentications can be compromised, bypassed. The phishing scams now will take into account that you're using multi-factor and snake it out of the user. That's great. That's a harder target, and most of these guys doing this stuff are going after the easy targets. Enabling any sort of multi-factor is better than no multi-factor. Now, in a pure security world, we can sit here and argue about which ones are better than others, like should you really be sending it to a cell phone or an email address that could potentially be compromised. I personally, if I had my druthers, it would always be a hard token. Even though RSA kind of got that black eye years ago from having to compromise, I still love RSA tokens. But again, any multi-factor is better than none. I really, really encourage people to do that. Another leak, Theta leak, 1 million photos and users data. Again, what is it? It's an open database. We have this problem with databases in the cloud. They're not secured. Anything from open S3 buckets to even if they're not open S3 buckets, you know, the password and username are guessed and guessed. Okay, yeah, it's better than not having a password on it, but not by much. Researchers, Pyramid Hotel Group, security info, stored security information on an open, accessible server. So this time it wasn't necessarily the database for the company's data, it was the log data. Now, here's a fun one that you get into with a lot of ops people, because you say, I want your logs protected as if they're proprietary. And they always fight with me and go, why? How many people have ever typed in your password in the username field? We all have. If you aren't raising your hand, you're lying. It's real simple. Now, what's in a log? If I look in a log, I'm going to, well, that's nice. Their password is I love cats. Okay, now who tried logging in before or after that? Usually after it, and you go, oh, these 4 people logged in. So guess what? One of those 4 people, their password is I love cats. And do you think anybody changes their password after they've done this? Again, let's all be honest here. You've done it and you didn't go, damn, and change your password. Instead you went, hope no one saw that. And that's all well and good until somebody looks at the logs. If you're ever bored, remember I do incident response. If you're ever bored, go grab some logs. They can be quite entertaining. On the other side of that coin, if you grab the logs, you got to fix what you find. So be careful. Undetectable hidden WASP Linux malware. How many people heard about this one? People always say, it's open source, Eric. Why don't you trust it? Millions of people are looking at it. It can't be bad. Well, apparently in some cases, there was bad stuff injected in. And this is not the first time bad stuff has been injected in. If you go back in time, you can talk about things like SSH had a problem. You can talk about various distros of Linux that have been compromised at the distro source. And again, if I'm a bad guy and I can put a backdoor in at the distro source, awesome, because now it's going to propagate all around the place with very little effort. Open source is not necessarily a bad thing, but verify. So if you don't have the capability, you should be getting the capability to check or pull from either a trusted site, trusted source, I should say, somebody that is verifying the integrity of it, or you should be verifying the integrity of it yourself. A good example is just one tool out there is one called Black Duck. Okay, scan some of the open source you use with a tool like Black Duck, and you might be really shocked about what you find in those various open sources that you're trying to use. Okay, lots of vulnerabilities that well known but haven't been patched. Facebook removes fraudulent Iranian accounts. Really? Okay, you remove some. How many people, when they do security work, have sock puppet accounts? Guess what? None of mine have been removed. Okay, it's a fact of life. Are these probably bad, trying to do bad things? Sure. But trying to keep up with fraudulent accounts and social media, now that's a whack-a-mole game. Docker, how many people use Docker? We got a lot of Docker users out there? Yeah. Race condition flaw could grant attackers root access to the host file system. Have you guys patched your Docker deployments?
Read on.
No, I'm not going to keep reading. That is the good news. Okay. One of the only reasons I brought this article out was not to poke on Docker. It was to talk about how fast things like Docker and Kubernetes are evolving. And where we have a vacuum is actually in the security tools used to protect those, used to analyze those. There's lots of things used, lots of different open source tools used with both Docker and Kubernetes that when I started looking at them, I said, hey, this is not a bad tool, but I need you guys to do 4 things for me. I said, 1, I need you to manage the secrets. Okay, and they said, secrets? The passwords that this thing's going to have. Oh, that's in a text file on the operating system. No, bad. Okay. Well, how do we fix that? We'll talk about that later. That's a whole evening of itself up here. Okay. Next thing, logging. Well, it does some logging. It logs when it fires up and when it comes down. Great. Does it log when somebody authenticates? No, but it logs when somebody fails an authentication. Well, what about when it is a good authentication? Well, we don't log that stuff. That's a problem. How many people out here have done incident response and forensics? Having just the failed side of the house, oh my God. And then, of course, what happens is you could say, well, I saw the failure, then I stopped seeing the failure of that account. And the first thing management says is, well, what do you see now that you don't see the failure anymore? What happened? What did they access? I don't know. We don't manage the stuff that's a good, clean authentication. Well, why not? Again, if you've ever had those conversations, you know how they go. They don't go well. Okay? One of the third thing to do is a lot of these open source tools, again, scan them with something. Look for vulnerabilities. Okay? Look for the fact that, yes, they pull from other sources and bring things. They use other people's libraries. That's perfectly cool. The problem is how often do they update those libraries? Is one of those libraries got a race condition in it or something that's a major vulnerability that's folded in that you don't know about? And again, there's a lot of tools out there now starting to appear on the market. Look at these things. Again, Black Duck is one that I'm familiar with. Okay? When you scan some of these open source tools, in some cases, they come back very clean. In other cases, they don't come back clean at all. And one of the last areas I look at for some of these tools is the crypto. When I say crypto, I'm not only talking about encryption, I'm talking about digital signing and everything else. And the first thing people go is, it uses AES or it uses Blowfish or whatever. And I'm like, I really don't care. I can use any of those. They're secure. I said, how do I know the crypto algorithms have been verified? And I asked for FIPS validation. Well, this is open source. They're not going to pay for that. I get that. But here's my problem. How do I know that crypto algorithm in there hasn't been tampered to create a backdoor? I don't. It's open source. And I am nowhere near technically competent enough to be looking at crypto algorithms and go, yep, this one's a problem, that one's not. Yes, sir.
There's also the problem with crypto configuration.
Yes.
RSA, where the key space is greatly reduced. You can have the world's most secure algorithm, but if the management, the seeds are, key space is so small that it's guessable, then you've done nothing.
Yep. There's a couple of common, call them attacks, vulnerabilities, whether intentional or unintentional. There's stupid things I've seen done by open source developers, like writing out both the plain text file and the encrypted file before it stores it someplace. Well, if I have both, that's going to help me on a cryptographic attack to figure out what the key is. If it's just not written into the source code directly, okay? We see that all the time. The other thing is there are ways of weakening crypto algorithms by, best way to do it is to not make it a real random number. To take your random number pool set and start making it a very small number. Now all of a sudden I don't have to break the world, I have to break a much smaller set. And again, that's a topic for a whole nother presentation. But the whole point is how do I know, just because you say you're encrypting, how do I know you're encrypting and it's good? One of the challenges I'm working through right now is I've got a group that the actual keys are being generated by a hardware-based system, a KMS, and it is FIPS 140-level 4 certified, okay? Nice hardened thing. And they're like, look, it generates secure keys. And I said, you're right, it generates secure keys. Now, when that secure key gets over into this software that you've written over here, how do you handle it? Well, no, that's FIPS compliant. Congratulations, that's one piece of the puzzle, okay? And it doesn't follow along. Just because I generated the key properly doesn't mean I'm using it properly, to your point, okay? So it's important to look at these things. And while they seem trivial, while they may say, people say, well, who's going to ever look at that? That's how some of these things we're going to find we have problems years down the road. Last one I'm going to bring up before I'll open it up. External Blue, remember that lovely NSA tool? Believed to be behind the Baltimore attack. Okay, yeah, well, I'm not shocked, I'm not surprised. It's like you don't think the bad guys are going to use really cool tools. I think what's more terrifying to me that tool really targets XP and Vista. So you're telling me this organization is still running operating systems that old? I think even if they didn't have this tool, they probably have problems. But we won't go there. But this is not going to stop anytime soon, okay? And the tools out there that you can find, they're just getting better and better, okay? There's now a phishing toolkit that you can actually go down and use that you will tell it that, hey, this group uses two-factor authentication. So it will set up and it will look like the two-factor authentication the user is expecting. Okay, so yeah, great. They go, they get their trigger, they get their two-factor authentication credentials, they put it into this, and then I redirect them somewhere else to the real site. Meanwhile, I've got your valid credentials that I can use in real time to go in and start harvesting data. Because on a lot of these sites, does it allow multiple authentications in? Yep. A lot of the sites, even with 2FA, you say, well, how many concurrent connections do you allow? And a lot of the times the answer I get back from the vendors is, what do you mean? Well, how many people could log on with my credentials? And I actually had one company, and this is no joke, said you could have your entire company log on with that set of credentials if you wanted. I basically left the room at that point, okay? And we wonder why we all job security. So, those are the ones I just grabbed real quick. Does anybody else got any good articles? Yes, sir.
Extending on Baltimore, that was all based on the Bolt 7 from the
Yes.
CIA hack. And China's turned it around using the same tools on us. Plus they've run it out into various hacker groups. So now everyone's leveled up their game to the CIA's new hacking tools.
Yeah, there's a lot of people using the tools. It's not unique to any one country or organization. There's lots of people using them. You know,
It's just leveled up, made it harder, made it more difficult for us.
well, and the key for the good guys is you have to know how those tools work, what to look for, and we're going to have a talk about it today about things like what do you look for in the logs? What do you have as your SIM? You know, can you look for key events that may indicate that you've got something like those tools being used? And quite honestly, the best way I've found to figure that out, I go attack a goat box, okay? Goat machine that's fully patched or protected to the level that I want it protected, but full of logging and monitoring, I attack it and I see what alerts come up so I can go, aha, if I see this sequence, it could be that tool. Okay, and that's just as important as getting IOCs for a tool, is looking at, because a lot of times when we talk about getting indicators of compromise, IOCs for a tool, we don't talk about what it looks like in the logs themselves. And that's a really important piece, is to know what it looks like so you can take action. And then obviously with any of this stuff, what do you do to take action? And some of it is you unplug, which people really don't like hearing. Other questions?
Thanks.
All right.
We're good. Good on time. Appreciate you guys. Give a big hand.